Picture this, you're sitting in an airplane at 3,000 feet above Los Angeles, the engine is humming smoothly, the controls feel responsive in your hands, and you're about to attempt something that aviation experts said was impossible. But here's the catch, you've never seen the sky you're flying through, never witnessed the ground rushing beneath you, never laid eyes on the instrument panel that's supposed to keep you alive. You were born completely blind. This isn't a thought experiment. This is the reality that Michael Chen faced every time he climbed into the cockpit of his Cessna 172, and somehow, impossibly, he became one of the safest and most skilled pilots anyone had ever seen. But how? How do you fly a machine that seems designed entirely for people who can see, when you've spent your entire life in darkness? The story begins long before Michael ever touched an airplane. It starts with a 3-year-old boy running through his house with impossible precision, dodging furniture and navigating stairs as if he had some kind of internal radar. His parents, Sarah and David Chen, watched in amazement, as their blind son seemed to know exactly where everything was, even when toys were moved or furniture rearranged. It was like he could see things that weren't there, Sarah remembers. He would point at airplanes flying overhead before any of us even heard them. We thought maybe he wasn't completely blind, but the doctors confirmed it. He had absolutely no vision at all. What the Chen family didn't realize was that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Michael's brain was rewiring itself in ways that would later make him capable of achievements that seemed impossible. When most children were learning to ride bicycles, Michael was learning to echolocate, using sound waves to create detailed mental maps of his environment. He would click his tongue and listen to how the sound bounced off objects, building three-dimensional pictures in his mind with startling accuracy. But this wasn't just simple navigation. Michael was developing what scientists would later recognize as one of the most sophisticated non-visual spatial processing systems ever documented. His parents began to notice extraordinary behaviors. Michael could predict when doors would open before anyone knocked. He could sense when people were approaching from behind, even on carpeted floors. Most remarkably, he seemed to know when the family cat was about to jump down from furniture, catching the animal mid-leap as if he had eyes in the back of his head. We started testing him, Sarah recalls. We'd rearrange furniture while he was sleeping, move his toys to different rooms, even change the layout of his bedroom. Within minutes of waking up, he'd have mapped the entire new configuration. It was like watching someone with supernatural powers. What the family didn't understand was that Michael's brain was performing feats of neural adaptation that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about human sensory processing. His auditory cortex wasn't just processing sound, it was creating visual-like representations of space. His tactile system wasn't just feeling textures, it was measuring distances and calculating velocities. His vestibular system, responsible for balance and spatial orientation, had developed precision that would make fighter pilots envious. By age 7, Michael had developed an obsession that would define his life. Every time an airplane passed overhead, he would freeze, tilt his head, and track its path across the sky with laser precision. But this wasn't casual interest. It was as if he was reading invisible flight paths written in the air above him. He began to distinguish between different aircraft types, just by their engine sounds with accuracy that amazed aviation enthusiasts who tested him. A Boeing 737 had a distinctive whine that was nothing like the deeper rumble of a military transport. Small private planes created entirely different acoustic signatures than commercial jets, but Michael went further. He could identify specific airlines by subtle variations in engine maintenance, determine aircraft altitude by sound Doppler effects, and even predict flight paths by analyzing how engine noise reflected off terrain features. His acoustic abilities reached almost supernatural levels. He could distinguish between a Cessna 172 and a Cessna 182, aircraft so similar that many pilots couldn't tell them apart visually. He knew the difference between a Piper Cherokee and a Piper Archer by engine sound alone. Military aircraft were his specialty. He could identify F-16S, F-18S, and even the rare F-22 Raptor by their unique acoustic signatures. Local pilots began bringing Michael to air shows not as a curiosity but as an expert. "This kid knows more about aircraft identification than most air traffic controllers," said retired Air Force Colonel Jim Stevens. "He can tell you not just what type of plane is overhead but how many engines it has, approximately what altitude it's flying, and even guess at its destination based on flight path analysis. It's absolutely remarkable." His bedroom became a shrine to aviation. Model airplanes hung from the ceiling, but these weren't just decorations. Michael had explored every inch of these models with his fingertips, understanding their aerodynamics in ways that sighted children never could. He knew how the curve of a wing created lift, how control surfaces changed airflow, how propellers bit into the air to create thrust. But Michael's understanding went deeper than mechanical knowledge. He had built what amounted to a tactile library of aviation. His fingers could detect differences in wing camber that were measured in millimeters. He understood how flaps and ailerons worked not just in theory, but through physical exploration of their movement and resistance. He could explain concepts like angle of attack, center of gravity and aerodynamic stall, using his hands to demonstrate principles that many pilot students struggled to grasp visually. His collection grew to include detailed scale models of everything from World War II fighters to modern commercial jets. Each model was positioned at a specific angle that represented different flight attitudes: climb, descent, banking turns, and level flight. Michael would run his fingers over these formations, absorbing three-dimensional relationships that would later prove crucial to his understanding of aircraft control. The most sophisticated part of his bedroom setup was a tactile control panel he'd built with his father's help. Using parts from old electronics, they'd created a mock cockpit with switches, knobs, and levers that replicated the layout of a real aircraft. Michael would spend hours flying this simulator, his hands dancing across controls as he imagined complex flight scenarios. He would conduct entire flights in his imagination. David Chen remembers pre-flight checklists, engine startup procedures, radio communications with imaginary air traffic controllers, navigation between airports he'd never visited. His attention to detail was incredible. He even made different engine sounds with his mouth to represent various aircraft types during different phases of flight. This imaginative flying served as sophisticated mental preparation. Without realizing it, Michael was developing muscle memory for cockpit procedures, internalizing the logical flow of flight operations, and building neural pathways that would later allow him to operate real aircraft with surprising fluency. When Michael turned 12, his father made a decision that seemed crazy to everyone who heard about it. "I'm taking him to an airfield," David announced. "He needs to experience real airplanes." At the vintage aircraft display at a local airport, something magical happened. While other visitors admired paint schemes and visual details, Michael experienced these machines in a completely different way. He spent hours with his hands pressed against the aluminum skin of a restored P-51 Mustang, feeling subtle vibrations from wind moving over the wings. He traced every rivet, every panel line, every curve of the fuselage. But the real transformation occurred when he climbed into the cockpit. His hands moved across the instrument panel, as if guided by muscle memory from a previous life. Throttle, mixture control, propeller pitch, radio stack. He found every control, every switch, every gauge without hesitation. "In 40 years of flying, I've never seen anything like it," said Captain Jack Morrison, the airfield owner who was watching. "This kid understands airplanes in ways that took me decades to learn. He's not just feeling the aircraft, he's communicating with it." Captain Morrison had seen thousands of aspiring pilots over the years. Many arrived with enthusiasm but lacked the intuitive understanding that separated good pilots from great ones. Others had natural talent but couldn't grasp the mechanical complexity of aircraft systems. Michael was different. He possessed both intuitive feel and technical comprehension at levels that Morrison had rarely encountered in experienced aviators. What happened next defied aviation tradition. Morrison made an unusual offer. He would provide Michael with complete ground school training, free of charge, using teaching methods adapted specifically for non-visual learning. This wasn't charity. Morrison recognized that he might be witnessing the emergence of a new type of pilot, one whose abilities could revolutionize how aviation instruction was conducted. "I've taught hundreds of students," Morrison explained to skeptical colleagues. "Most spend months learning to interpret what their eyes are telling them about aircraft behavior. Michael already understands what aircraft are trying to communicate through sound, vibration, and control response. He's not learning to see, he's learning the language we use to describe what he already knows." That chance encounter changed everything. Captain Morrison offered to teach Michael about aviation, starting with ground school theory. What happened next defied every expectation anyone had about learning disabilities or the limitations of blindness. Michael absorbed information about aerodynamics, weather patterns, navigation, and aircraft systems at a rate that stunned his instructor. While other students struggled to visualize how air moved over wing surfaces, Michael already understood it intuitively. He could feel air pressure changes with his hands, detect wind direction shifts through subtle cues, and navigate using methods that most pilots never master. His learning process was unlike anything Morrison had experienced. Traditional flight instruction relies heavily on visual demonstrations, showing students how control inputs affect aircraft attitude, how weather patterns appear on radar, how to identify landmarks for navigation. With Michael, every lesson had to be redesigned around tactile and auditory learning. But this constraint led to unexpected breakthroughs. When Morrison explained lift generation, Michael didn't just understand the concept, he could demonstrate it by holding his hand out the car window at different angles, feeling how air pressure changed with slight adjustments. When discussing weather patterns, Michael could predict wind shifts by sensing barometric pressure changes that others couldn't detect. Most remarkably, Michael developed an almost supernatural ability to understand aircraft performance through engine sound analysis. He could detect the subtle changes in engine rhythm that indicated altitude variations, the slight pitch modifications that revealed airspeed changes, and the harmonic fluctuations that suggested engine health issues before they became apparent on instruments. Traditional students learn to read instruments and then interpret what that information means for aircraft control. Morrison observed, Michael learns to feel what the aircraft is doing, and then uses instruments to confirm what his senses are already telling him. He's essentially flying the aircraft directly rather than flying the instruments. This fundamental difference in approach would later prove crucial to Michael's success. While other pilots occasionally became confused by conflicting instrument readings or spatial disorientation, Michael's primary flight references came from sources that couldn't malfunction or provide misleading information. He doesn't learn about flying, Captain Morrison explained to skeptical aviation authorities. He already knows flying, he just needed someone to teach him the language we use to describe it. By 16, Michael had passed every written examination required for a private pilot license. The Federal Aviation Administration had never encountered anything like this before. Here was someone who understood aviation theory better than most commercial pilots, who could calculate weight and balance problems in his head, who knew weather patterns and airspace regulations better than flight instructors with decades of experience. There was just one problem: how do you actually fly an airplane when you can't see? The answer came from an unexpected source: military training programs that taught pilots to fly in zero visibility conditions. For decades, combat pilots had learned to operate entirely on instruments, in clouds, at night, in situations where looking outside the cockpit could be fatal. If military pilots could fly blind when necessary, maybe someone who was already blind could learn to fly all the time. Michael's first flight simulator session became the stuff of legend. Strapped into a device that replicated every aspect of flight except vision, he was asked to perform basic maneuvers while his instructor expected him to struggle with the complexity of managing multiple instruments simultaneously. Instead, something extraordinary happened. While sighted pilots often became overwhelmed by arrays of gauges and displays, Michael processed the information with crystal clarity. His enhanced hearing detected subtle changes in engine rhythm that indicated altitude shifts. His heightened sense of touch felt the aircraft's attitude through vibrations in his seat. His spatial awareness, developed through years of navigating without sight, gave him an intuitive understanding of the aircraft's position in three-dimensional space. It was like watching someone speak a language they were born knowing, the instructor reported later. While other students translated visual information into physical responses, Michael was having a direct conversation with the airplane. The simulator sessions led to the real test: actual flight training in a modified Cessna 172. Captain Morrison had equipped the aircraft with advanced audio systems that announced altitude, heading, airspeed, and engine parameters. But the modifications went beyond simple voice announcements. The aircraft featured haptic feedback systems that translated instrument readings into tactile sensations, allowing Michael to feel flight data through vibrations in his seat and control surfaces. The engineering behind these modifications was revolutionary. Working with local electronics experts, Morrison had created what amounted to a multi-sensory flight interface. Altitude changes were represented by variations in seat vibration frequency. Heading information came through directional audio cues in his headset. Engine parameters triggered different tactile patterns in the control yoke. These systems weren't just technological novelties. They represented a new philosophy of human-machine interface design. Instead of forcing Michael to adapt to visual instruments, the aircraft had been adapted to communicate through his enhanced senses. As they taxied toward the runway for Michael's first lesson, his hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. The months of ground school and simulator training had prepared him theoretically, but this was the moment when theory would meet reality. Tower Cessna 472 ready for departure. Michael spoke into the radio, his voice calm and professional. The radio call followed standard aviation phraseology perfectly, evidence of his thorough preparation and natural aptitude for procedural precision. Cessna 472, wind 240 at 8, runway 24 cleared for takeoff. The tower's response provided crucial information: wind direction and speed, runway designation, and clearance to begin the takeoff roll. For sighted pilots, this information supplements what they can see: runway alignment, wind sock position, traffic patterns. For Michael, radio communication would be his primary source of external flight information throughout his aviation career. Michael pushed the throttle forward, the engine roared to life, and threw his feet on the rudder pedals. He felt the airplane's tendency to veer left from propeller torque. His hands on the control yoke corrected automatically, keeping the aircraft tracking straight down the center line of a runway he had never seen, but could sense through vibrations in the landing gear. At 60 knots, he pulled back gently on the controls. The aircraft lifted smoothly into the air, and for the first time in his life, Michael Chen was flying. What happened over the following months challenged everything aviation experts thought they knew about pilot training. Michael didn't just learn to fly, he developed techniques that made him in many ways superior to sighted pilots. While others might become disoriented in clouds or confused at night, Michael operated with consistent precision regardless of visibility conditions. His progress exceeded every expectation Morrison had set. Most student pilots required 60 Mars at 80 hours of training to reach solo proficiency. Michael was ready in 35 hours, not because standards were lowered, but because his learning curve was unprecedented. His non-visual approach to flight eliminated many of the common training obstacles that sighted students faced. Traditional students often struggled with spatial disorientation, particularly during instrument training when visual cues were removed. Michael had no visual cues to become confused by, so his spatial orientation remained consistently accurate. Weather conditions that grounded other student pilots, fog, haze, low clouds, had no impact on Michael's ability to fly safely. But perhaps most impressive was Michael's development of what aviation psychologists would later term predictive flight awareness. While most pilots react to aircraft behavior, Michael learned to anticipate it. His enhanced sensory processing allowed him to detect minute changes in engine sound, control response, and aircraft attitude that occurred seconds before these changes registered on instruments. It was like flying with someone who could see into the future, Morrison recalls. Michael would begin corrective inputs before I even realized corrections were needed. He wasn't just managing the aircraft's current state, he was managing where it was going to be. This predictive ability extended to navigation, weather interpretation, and even traffic awareness. Michael could detect other aircraft through engine sound analysis long before they appeared on radar. He could predict wind pattern changes by sensing barometric pressure variations that instruments couldn't measure. His weather assessment skills became so refined that local pilots began consulting him for flight planning advice. His secret lay in how his brain processed flight information. Years of enhanced sensory development had created neural pathways that allowed him to simultaneously track altitude through engine sound, detect wind shifts through control pressure, monitor aircraft performance through vibration patterns, and maintain navigation through methods that seemed almost supernatural. The aviation community initially resisted accepting Michael's capabilities. How could someone who couldn't see possibly fly safely? What if other aircraft were in the area? What about emergency situations? How could he land without seeing the runway? These concerns led to the most rigorous flight testing any pilot had ever undergone. Michael was required to demonstrate proficiency in every possible scenario: instrument approaches in simulated bad weather, engine failure emergencies, navigation using only radio beacons, precision landings in crosswinds, even aerobatic maneuvers that tested his spatial orientation to the absolute limit. He passed every test with flying colors. The day of his first solo flight became legendary in aviation circles. While regulations required a safety pilot for most students, Michael had demonstrated such exceptional skill that authorities agreed to monitor his flight from the ground using radar and radio communication alone. This decision represented a significant departure from standard practice and required approval from multiple levels of aviation authority. The Federal Aviation Administration had never encountered a situation quite like this. Standard solo procedures assumed that student pilots would rely primarily on visual references for navigation, traffic avoidance, and airport operations. Michael's case required developing entirely new monitoring protocols that emphasized radio communication, radar tracking, and ground-based traffic control. Weather conditions were perfect: clear skies, calm winds, no other traffic in the pattern. These conditions weren't accidental. Morrison and aviation authorities had waited weeks for ideal circumstances that would minimize any possible complications during this historic flight. As Michael taxied out alone for the first time, airport personnel gathered to watch history being made. Control tower operators, aircraft mechanics, flight instructors, and other pilots had assembled to witness what many considered impossible. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and concern. Everyone understood they were watching either a breakthrough or a potential tragedy. Cessna 472, you're cleared for a local flight. Remain in the practice area. Contact ground when ready to return, came the tower's instruction. The The practice area was a designated section of airspace away from commercial traffic lanes, specifically chosen for its predictable conditions and isolation from other aircraft. Michael would spend the next hour in this protected environment, demonstrating that he could safely operate an aircraft without any visual references or safety pilot assistance. For the next hour, Michael flew rectangular patterns around the airport, performing climbs, descents and turns with mathematical precision. Ground controllers tracked his every move on radar, watching as he maintained exact altitudes and headings with machine-like accuracy. His flight path was so precise that it looked like it had been drawn with a ruler. When he finally requested clearance to land, his approach was so smooth that observers on the ground couldn't tell anything unusual was happening until they realized there was only one person visible in the cockpit. The landing was perfect. Michael had successfully completed his first solo flight without any visual input whatsoever, relying entirely on instruments, radio guidance, and his remarkable enhanced senses. Word of Michael's achievement spread through aviation forums and eventually reached mainstream media. The reactions were mixed. Some celebrated this triumph of human adaptation and technology, while others questioned the safety implications and precedent being set. But Michael had bigger dreams than just solo flight. He wanted to prove that blind pilots could operate safely in busy airspace alongside regular traffic. This meant developing systems and procedures that would ensure separation from other aircraft without relying on the traditional method of visually spotting and avoiding them. The solution came through partnerships with technology companies developing collision avoidance systems. Michael became a test pilot for advanced traffic alerting equipment, automated navigation tools, and enhanced communication systems. His unique perspective, someone who had never relied on visual flying, made him the perfect evaluator of technologies designed to improve safety for all pilots. These collaborations led to innovations that benefited the entire aviation community. Voice-activated controls, enhanced audio warning systems, improved instrument layouts, and advanced autopilot interfaces all emerged from Michael's work with engineers who learned to understand flight from a non-visual perspective. By 2018, Michael had logged over 500 hours of flight time and had earned his instrument rating, the advanced certification that allows pilots to fly in clouds, fog, and other low-visibility conditions. For sighted pilots, this represents one of the most challenging ratings to obtain, requiring them to learn to ignore their natural visual instincts and trust instruments completely. For Michael, it was simply an extension of how he had always flown. The instrument rating check ride took place on a foggy San Francisco morning when visibility was less than a quarter mile. Perfect conditions for testing instrument flying skills, but conditions that would challenge even experienced pilots. The federal examiner, initially skeptical but increasingly impressed, watched as Michael pre-flighted the aircraft entirely through touch, methodically checking fuel levels, oil quantity, control surface movement, and engine condition with thoroughness that exceeded what most pilots accomplished with their eyes. The 3-hour flight included every maneuver required for instrument certification, precision approaches to multiple airports, holding patterns, missed approaches, and emergency procedures. Throughout the flight, Michael demonstrated not just competence but mastery of skills that challenge even veteran pilots. The most impressive moment came during a simulated engine failure scenario. While most pilots in this situation would scan visually for emergency landing sites, Michael immediately analyzed wind patterns, terrain features, and airport locations based on navigation data and radio communications. His emergency approach was textbook perfect, resulting in a smooth landing at an alternate airport. Rating approved, the examiner announced as they shut down the engine. In 20 years of conducting check rides, I've never seen instrument flying of this caliber. You've redefined what I thought was possible in aviation. Michael's success opened doors for other disabled aviators and prompted regulatory changes that made aviation more accessible. But perhaps more importantly, his journey revealed something profound about human potential and the nature of perception itself. Medical researchers became fascinated by Michael's abilities. Brain imaging studies revealed that his visual cortex, despite never receiving input from his eyes, had become a sophisticated processing center for spatial and navigational information. When flying, this region showed intense activity as it integrated data from his other senses to create what scientists called a four-dimensional environmental map, a real-time understanding of his position in space that included not just location but also velocity, acceleration, and predictive awareness. This discovery had implications far beyond aviation. Technology companies studied his methods to improve autonomous vehicle navigation. Space agencies became interested in his techniques for potential use in environments where visual navigation might be compromised. Medical researchers explored how his approaches could help other blind individuals develop enhanced spatial awareness. But Michael remained focused on flying and teaching others. He established the first flight school specifically designed to teach instrument flying techniques to both visually impaired and sighted students. His methods were so effective that experienced airline pilots began enrolling to improve their own instrument skills. "Michael taught me to fly with my whole body, not just my eyes," said Captain Jennifer Walsh, a commercial airline pilot who completed his course. "When I encounter weather that drops visibility to zero, I now have tools and confidence that I never possessed before. He's made me a significantly safer pilot." The flight school also became a research center where engineers and pilots collaborated on developing next-generation aviation safety systems. Michael's insights led to improvements in automated collision avoidance, weather detection, and emergency landing systems that became standard equipment on new aircraft. International recognition came when Michael was invited to demonstrate his flying techniques at the World Aviation Congress in Paris, flying a borrowed aircraft in unfamiliar European airspace, guided only by French air traffic controllers and his enhanced senses. He completed a flawless demonstration flight that included aerobatic maneuvers, precision navigation, and a landing so perfect it drew applause from seasoned aviation professionals. What amazed observers wasn't just his technical skill, but the calm confidence with which he operated. While other pilots needed extensive briefings about local procedures and terrain, Michael adapted instantly to the new environment. His enhanced spatial processing allowed him to build accurate mental maps of the unfamiliar airspace within minutes of first radio contact. The demonstration included a series of maneuvers that challenged even experienced aerobatic pilots, flying precise geometric patterns at varying altitudes, executing steep turns with mathematical accuracy, completing simulated emergency procedures that brought the aircraft to predetermined positions within feet of the target, all accomplished through pure instrument reference and sensory feedback. The most remarkable moment occurred when air traffic control lost radio contact for 3 minutes due to equipment failure. Without any external guidance, Michael continued his planned flight pattern with such precision that controllers were able to re-establish contact simply by calling his predicted position. He had been flying by dead reckoning, using time, heading, and airspeed calculations to maintain exact navigation, a skill that few modern pilots possess. European aviation authorities were so impressed that they invited Michael to help develop new training standards. His techniques for maintaining spatial orientation during communication failures became part of mandatory curriculum for commercial pilots operating in European airspace. The Paris demonstration also attracted aerospace manufacturers who recognized the potential applications of his methods. Companies developing autonomous aircraft realized that his non-visual navigation techniques could improve artificial intelligence flight systems. His ability to process multiple simultaneous input streams provided a model for how AI could better integrate sensory data. Today, Michael continues pushing the boundaries of what's considered possible in aviation. He's developing haptic feedback systems that allow blind pilots to feel other aircraft through tactile sensations. He's working with researchers studying how enhanced sensory abilities might improve safety for all pilots, regardless of visual capability. His latest project involves sensory flight training, programs that teach sighted pilots to fly using enhanced audio and tactile cues. The training has proven so effective that major airlines have incorporated elements into their pilot development programs. Students who complete sensory training demonstrate improved performance in low visibility conditions, reduced reliance on automated systems, and enhanced situational awareness during emergencies. When you remove pilots' primary sense temporarily, they discover capabilities they never knew they had, Michael explains. The goal isn't making them fly blind, it's making them complete pilots who can operate safely regardless of what their eyes tell them. One of his most successful students, Captain Maria Rodriguez from American Airlines, credits Michael's training with saving 180 lives during an emergency landing in dense fog. "When our instruments failed and visibility dropped to zero, I used everything Michael taught me about flying by feel and sound. Without his training, we wouldn't have made it down safely." Michael's influence extends beyond individual pilots. His aircraft hangar has become a destination for aviation enthusiasts, disability advocates, and researchers worldwide. The walls display letters from people inspired by his story to pursue seemingly impossible dreams. Specialized training equipment fills the space, modified aircraft with advanced audio systems, haptic feedback controls, and navigation tools developed specifically for sensory-enhanced flying. The hangar also houses Michael's research laboratory, where he collaborates with neuroscientists studying his enhanced spatial processing mechanisms. Brain imaging conducted during flight reveals neural activity patterns that differ dramatically from typical pilots, with regions working together in ways scientists are still trying to understand. Dr. Sarah Chen from the Institute for Sensory Research has studied Michael's capabilities for 5 years. Her team has documented processing speeds and accuracy levels that exceed normal human ranges in spatial memory, auditory discrimination, vibration sensitivity, and temporal coordination. Michael represents evolution in human sensory processing, Dr. Chen explains. His brain has developed capabilities that could theoretically be trained in others, but would require years of intensive development. He's shown us that human potential extends far beyond what we consider normal limitations. This research has led to applications beyond aviation. Medical device companies use his techniques to improve navigation systems for visually impaired individuals. Technology firms apply his methods to enhance complex machinery interfaces. Space agencies study his approaches for environments where visual navigation might be compromised. Michael's academic influence grows through universities now offering courses in alternative sensory navigation based on his methods. The Michael Chen Institute for Enhanced Human Performance at UC Davis focuses specifically on researching human capabilities that transcend traditional sensory limitations. Students learn not just about flying, but about pushing human potential in any field where enhanced sensory processing provides advantages. Graduates pursue careers ranging from surgical medicine to deep-sea exploration, all applying principles derived from Michael's non-visual navigation approach. The Michael Chen Foundation, established in 2022, provides scholarships and training for individuals with disabilities pursuing careers in aviation, engineering, and technical fields. The foundation has already sponsored over 200 students through specialized programs, resulting in successful careers previously thought impossible. These graduates have become pilots, air traffic controllers, aircraft mechanics, and aerospace engineers, proving that Michael's success wasn't unique but representative of broader human potential waiting to be discovered. Perhaps the most touching response comes from a young girl in Michigan who lost her sight in an accident. "You showed me that losing my eyes doesn't mean losing my dreams. I'm starting ground school next month, and someday I'll be flying next to you." Michael's response remains simple: the sky belongs to everyone who has the courage to claim it. His journey from a blind child tracking airplanes by sound to a pioneering aviator who redefined possibility took 34 years. Along the way, he didn't just learn to fly, he taught the world to understand flight in entirely new ways. The ripple effects continue expanding. Aviation safety statistics show measurable improvements in low-visibility accidents since his training methods gained adoption. Insurance companies offer reduced premiums to pilots completing sensory flight programs. Aircraft manufacturers incorporate design elements inspired by his enhanced sensory requirements into new cockpit layouts. Most significantly, Michael's story has changed how society views disability and human potential. Major corporations actively recruit individuals with sensory differences, recognizing that these differences often represent enhanced capabilities in other areas. Sensory diversity has entered business vocabulary as companies seek unique processing advantages that different neurological configurations provide. Educational institutions have restructured approaches to learning differences, focusing on developing alternative strengths rather than simply accommodating perceived weaknesses. Michael regularly speaks at universities, sharing not just flying techniques but philosophy about human adaptation and challenging assumed limitations. Every person has capabilities that exceed what they think possible, he tells audiences. The tragedy isn't that some face greater challenges, it's that most people never discover what they're truly capable of achieving. The question that began this story was how someone who had never seen could control a machine seemingly designed for vision. The answer was never about sight at all. It was about understanding that human potential extends far beyond imagined limitations, and that sometimes the most profound innovations come from people who experience the world differently. As Michael often tells students during their first lesson, vision is just one way to navigate the world. When you learn to fly with all your senses, you don't just become a pilot, you become a master of three-dimensional thinking. In his Cessna cockpit, climbing through morning sky above San Francisco, Michael Chen embodies a simple but revolutionary truth: the only real limitations are the ones we accept. Everything else is just turbulence to fly through. The tower's voice crackles through his headset: Cessna 472, contact departure, have a great flight. Roger Tower, switching to departure. And yes, Michael smiles as he banks toward the horizon he has never seen but knows intimately. It's always a great flight. His story continues each time he takes to the air, proving that impossible is simply possible, waiting for someone brave enough to attempt it. In a world often focused on what people cannot do, Michael Chen flies as a reminder of what becomes achievable when we focus on what they can.